I want to welcome everybody to our fourth and final public input session for the comprehensive plan update. Appreciate you coming out tonight and spending what'll be presumably less than 2 hours time. I'm going to be presenting first. I'm Tim Humans, Planning Director for the City of Winchester. I have with me David Stewart, Planner 1, our college intern, Eric Bittner, and then Director of Zoning and Inspections, Aaron Grisdale. We're going to kind of tag team this evening, presenting information to you, but mainly we want to get to where we give you the opportunity to give us your input on what you think are some of our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and then also input on where you think we should be making changes to the city. And so with that, I do want to introduce a couple of folks. We have one of our city councilors, Kim Herbstrip, who represents this ward, is with us this evening. Thank you for joining us. And why don't we have our planning commissioner stand up, Mark Loring, chairman of the commission. And we also have Brandon Pfeiffer, Lacey Burnett, and David Ray. Yeah, I thought there was four. So four. We have the majority of our planning commissioner here, even though we had a work session this afternoon. So let's go ahead and get started. In terms of tonight's meeting, a couple of things we want to do. This smart board, by the way, has a mind of its own, so you may find me, I think we're missing, let's see if we can get something to show up here. This smart board is different than all the other ones. And that is not the agenda for today's meeting. It appears to be hiding on us somehow. Come on. Well, I'll just tell you what the purpose of the meeting. Actually, I kind of already did. We do want to get your input. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the schedule, talk just briefly about the comprehensive plan process, and then delve into some of the trends, data that we've seen, particularly demographic analysis of where we are now, where we are projected to be out through the year 2040 in terms of population. And then we're going to turn it over to David and Eric, and they're going to lead you through some of the preliminary findings of the online survey. We also have a paper copy, and I believe at the tables you'll see a paper copy of the survey. If you have not taken the opportunity to fill out a response either by paper copy or online, we have extended the deadline for that until this Saturday, I believe, the 10th of August. So once we hit that date, then we'll no longer be accepting that form of input. However, through the entire process of updating plan, there'll be multiple opportunities to provide us with feedback. And okay, so in terms of the schedule, we are basically now involved with the first two elements on the schedule here in terms of receiving the public input on the surveys. We have extended that into August here. This is the last of the initial public input sessions, so after this evening we're going to be compiling all of the results from all four sessions, and we will be presenting that to the Planning Commission. By state law, the Planning Commission is the entity that is responsible for preparing the comprehensive plan and then forwarding a recommendation to City Council. Both the Planning Commission and Council have to have public hearings on this, so those will be very formal public hearings as compared to these less formal public input sessions. And we'll probably also have a public hearing or a public input session kind of midway through the process, because after we receive these various forms of input and try to compile the results of that for the Planning Commission, they are going to be looking at the existing vision statement and the goals and objectives that are in Chapter 3 of the current plan. That plan, by the way, dates back to 2011. We did one minor update in 2014 for Meadow Branch Avenue corridor, specifically the decision to relocate John Kerr Elementary out in that corridor. So after we get through that and start working with a consultant to develop some graphic content, particularly the redevelopment scenarios that are in Chapter 11 of the comprehensive plan, we are then going to come back to you, the public, and say, hey, did we hear you right? Did we come up with alternative scenarios for the future vision of Winchester that is consistent with what you told us. Now, that doesn't mean every individual person's proposal or critique is going to be specifically addressed, but on a larger basis, we hope that we are going in the right direction in terms of us, the city staff, advising the Planning Commission, and also what the Planning Commission is directing us to work on. After we get that kind of mid-process review, then we'll further evaluate those alternatives. And this is going to get into specific kinds of development scenarios, such as mixed-use development. And that probably is going to entail proposals where we'll look for places within the city to accommodate additional density, because we are a city that is still growing in terms of population. And finally, we'll get to the latter stages there where we go through that formal Planning Commission and City Council review. Okay, so let me begin just kind of a trend analysis here as far as where we are, a little look back on some of the demographic analysis, where we're headed, and then also a comparison of how we stand relative to some other similarly sized cities in Virginia, which are listed down on the bottom here. You can see Winchester at the bottom, and then also our surrounding counties here in the Shenandoah Valley. So even though these are the official projections, you can see we're really less than half a year away from the 2020 estimate. And then they being the Weldon Cooper Center down at University of Virginia, project out to 2030 and 2040. And so we're envisioned to go from about where we are now, 28,800, up to a little less than 33,000 population by 2040. And an interesting comparison here, if you look at Petersburg, they're on a reverse of Winchester. They go from 31.6 down to 28.3. We go from 28.8 up to 32.7. So kind of a contrasting tale of two cities there. But you can see where our comparables are in terms of other cities. Fredericksburg annexed a lot of land just before the state imposed the moratorium. And so they are really going to be jumping out of the comparable category, approaching 40,000 here by the year 2040. But most of the other cities you can see are growing only slightly, or in the case of Hopewell and Petersburg, they're actually declining. Among the counties, not really substantial growth in places like Shenandoah County, Warren County. Clark County obviously has very much a no growth or slow growth kind of policy. But Frederick County today, about 90,000 going to 117.4. So that's where the growth engine is going to be in the Shenandoah Valley.
Jim, are we going to make that 28,400?
We're already there. They do an annual estimate in addition to these projections, and they're already showing us at over 28,000. So.
Where does Harrisonburg fall in comparison to Winchester?
Harrisonburg is a difficult comparable because of the university. Their school year population is so much larger than when school is out. So we don't really use them, but because of the student body, it puts them well out of range, 50 to 60,000 maybe, something when the school's in session.
Question.
Yes?
In any of this, is there a discussion about too many people? Or is that something we'll talk about tonight?
About what people?
Like what's the ideal amount in terms of population, and then you go above it, now becomes 60,000?
There is no magic, or ideal population growth figure. Generally, the feeling is that in order to be sustainable, you have to have some positive growth. But when you look at Fredericksburg, they're talking about some serious budget impacts with, additional firefighters, school teachers, et cetera. And of course, Frederick County. Yeah, you read about it in the newspaper. Frederick County. That is a choice that they have made from a land use standpoint in terms of identifying the urban development area and the zoning to accommodate that. So this is looking at official estimates for the year 2018. And so down here again, Winchester, even back as of April 1 of 2018, we had already surpassed the 28,000 figure. So this is interesting in terms of since the last decennial census, 2010, Frederick County has grown by over 10,000 persons. Winchester, by comparison, has grown by fewer than 2,000 people. So gives you an idea, in terms of the growth rates. And again, you look at Fredericksburg, 16.7% compared to Winchester, 6.8. So we have tended to grow one side or the other of 1% annually, and very comfortable. That's a manageable type or sustainable type of growth. So we're very happy with where we are in that respect. Kind of looking now at the population from a standpoint of ethnicity and racial composition, the overwhelming percentage, 2/3 of the population, would be classified as Caucasian, non-Hispanic. You have another 10%, which would be African American or Black, non-Hispanic, and then this is kind of combining ethnicity and racial composition. For those who are Hispanic origin, regardless of whether they are white Hispanic or Black Hispanic, that's about 17% of our total population. And what I like to say at this point, particularly for school teachers or people who work with school-age population, our school-age population has a much higher percentage here than the general population does. And then finishing out, about 2% Asian racial composition and 4% other groups. In terms of education levels, we fare quite well. These colors we were noticing are completely different than they are on the other 3 elementary school smart screens. So the first one here is the Virginia average, and then Winchester is the second column here. So you can see in terms of persons who have at least a bachelor's degree or higher, we are a little below the state average. The next column over is Frederick County, so our rates here in Winchester are higher than surrounding county. The next one over here is the U.S. average, and so we're a little higher than the U.S. average, considerably lower than Leesburg. I don't think that comes as a surprise to anybody, Loudoun County Schools. And then the last one, not what we're striving for, Martinsburg here, struggling with a pretty low percentage. A couple of other figures there. So you see the percentages here. Let me move on to the next screen. In terms of age composition, we are a maturing population, like many jurisdictions in the country. Our average median age is 37 years, but we've seen growth in all age cohorts. And the largest amount of growth is occurring in the grouping of cohorts between the ages of 40 and 74. The second fastest growing group would be between the ages of 20 and 39. For purposes of the comprehensive plan, particularly with regard to geographic focus, we broke the city down into 10 geographic planning areas in the 2011 effort. And so pretty simple descriptions, compass bearings here. NC and OT is north central, which is generally north of Piccadilly Street, and then OT would be Old Town. So these correspond to census block groups, so it allows us to do analysis below the city as a whole, but only during the decennial census. So up until 2021, we won't have any way of breaking down demographic analysis more recent than 2010. Looking now at the housing stock in Winchester, we hear quite often, and maybe we'll hear from you tonight, that we don't have enough workforce housing. And so one of the things that we point out here is that even though we're a city, we have a tremendous amount of single-family detached housing stock. Almost 60% of our housing stock is in the form of single-family detached housing, 12% townhouse, and about a little less than 30% in the form of multifamily. And that's regardless of whether it's actually leased or whether it's a condominium type of arrangement. Now, that's different than occupancy, okay? So even though we have this large percentage of housing that can be owned, such as single-family homes and townhouses. Nonetheless, a large portion of that housing stock is leased. People are renting single-family homes as much as they are renting other forms of housing. So it turns out that we are a owner minority population here. Most of about 55%, a little less than that, of our housing stock is actually renter occupied. Only 45.6% is owner occupied. But that has remained stable for about the past 15 years, 5 years, and actually not changed a whole lot in the last 15 to 20 years. We kind of go back and forth between owner occupied and renter occupied in terms of majority. Most of the multifamily, no surprise, is in the downtown area and the south central area where you see the apartment developments. Most of the single family is out to the west, southwest, and then also in the east central areas. So looking back now, you can, this is interesting. Okay, I believe number one is 1980. Again, our smart screen is taking away some of our labels. This is starting in 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010, forecasting out to 2020, and then I think that may be 2030, I'm not sure. But again, you can see that we've generally had consistent positive growth, although it has been on different percentages between the decennial census. So I'm going to turn it over now to David, but if you haven't gone to the online survey, this is the web address where you can access the planning page to do so.
And 41% said they work in Winchester. If you selected that you live in Winchester for question 1, we asked, do you plan to live in Winchester for the next 5 years continuously? And 83% said yes. And then we asked, if you're not already retired, do you plan to retire in Winchester? And 40% said yes, and 44% said don't know yet. Only 17% said no. Okay, we asked the survey respondents' age brackets. And in the 18 to 24 age group, we had a very small response count. But starting with the 25 to 34 group, about 20% of the respondents were in that bracket. And then it's evenly spread out up to the 65 to 74 age bracket, and does drop off significantly after that. We asked kind of a general question about maintaining Winchester's assets and how would you rank the livability characteristics of the city of Winchester? Like, what is the most important aspect about Winchester? And the number one most popular response was great neighborhoods and housing. The quality of schools was a very popular response as well, and access to healthcare with the Winchester Medical Center. Obviously, it was a very important response about livability in Winchester. Then we decided to dig into different types of housing units and whether the respondent would support policies or just in general support this a new type of housing being introduced to Winchester. So we asked, would you support housing for retirees and empty nesters? And we had 4 categories for this for these types of questions. We had do not support, support, highly support, and unsure. When we asked about housing for retirees combined, we had about 85% said they either support or highly support that type of housing in the city. When we asked about whether there should be any developer incentives to encourage workforce housing affordable to people that live and should be able to live and work in Winchester, And again, a high level of support. Between support and high support, we're up at about 80% of the respondents said they would support that type of policy. Then we asked about housing to support young professionals in general, just the young professional working population. Over 90% said support or highly support for that category. We asked about whether housing for seniors, whether we should require that housing design be incorporated to support senior living and disabled accessibility. Again, 85% said support or highly support. We had a slightly different response when we asked on the questionnaire about student housing specifically. Again, overall, the support and highly support response was about 68%, so majority said they do support, but the not support percentage grew. About 21% said they do not support more student housing in the city, which is up from 8%, 6% for some of the other categories. We asked about single-family housing, which Tim mentioned earlier is our most common form of housing in the city of Winchester, and very few said they do not support that type of housing. Not much of a surprise there. Almost 90% say they support or highly support single-family housing. Then we switched gears and decided to ask a question about development in the city of Winchester and about green space, which is landscaping, lawn space, recreational space in developments, as opposed to an area being completely just building and asphalt coverage. So we asked in the Old Town urban, like the center of the city, is there too much green space, too little, or just right? And only 2% said too much green space. 47% said too little, and 50% said just right. When we asked that similar question, but about new development on undeveloped land, a few more said we require too much. 13% said we require too much in that type of development, but 54% also said too little with new development. Then we asked about neighborhood infill, which is where you have a project inside an already established neighborhood. And the respondents went back to only 7% saying too much. Most responses were too little, or we're doing it just right. Okay, next we switch gears to asking some transportation-related questions. We asked what would encourage you to walk more, to spend more time walking in the city of Winchester. The respondents could select as many answers as they would like, so these columns do not equal 100%. The most common response, though, was just more destinations within walking distance, connections to stores, businesses, and other public facilities. 66% said that that's important to get them to walk more. 63% said new sidewalks where there were none. And 60% said, hey, repair the ones that are already out there. Would encourage me to walk more. Then we asked about the bus system and what would encourage you to take the transit system more often. The number one response, 54% said absolutely nothing. The next most common response was 26 or 28% for convenience of location, bus stops, where the routes go. 26% said convenience of time, which would be shorter headways, which is when the bus runs more often on the route. And then 26% also said just better transit destinations served by the line itself. Switching to bicycling in Winchester, what would encourage you to bike more in Winchester? Some of the most common responses were more bike lanes for additional safety, and just better separation between biking lanes and automobile traffic. We asked the respondents also to look at what would be highest priority for the city to invest in itself. And the most common response for that question was continuing to attract and expand businesses here to the city of Winchester. The second most common was making streets more welcoming to pedestrians and cyclists. A couple other popular responses were expanding parks and recreation, and just in general more improvements to downtown Winchester. We did ask a hot button question: are you satisfied with the adequacy of your access to grocery stores in the city? And our possible responses were very satisfied, satisfied, not very satisfied, and very dissatisfied. 72% responded either very dissatisfied or not very satisfied. Only 27% said they were satisfied.
Before all the closings, or that after?
The survey went online in, when was it, in June? June, yeah. So this was after, yes. We asked to get a sense, the next question was to get a sense about where people do their grocery shopping, because there have been trends of shopping online, maybe not visiting the brick and mortar retail store that you traditionally have. So we asked, where do you purchase your groceries? And still 92% of the respondents said locally at a full service grocery store. So I'll turn it over to Eric, and he'll dive into some of the additional numbers about density and building heights and so forth.
How's it going, guys? So we included in the survey several free-form questions. Responses weren't required for these to submit the survey, though. So people didn't, not everybody responded. In this case, we were asking about where people would support increased density. We only had 295 responses out of the total. The primary responses were the south side of town, nowhere, and downtown. For our other question, we also asked about higher building heights. We had 303 respondents. 56% of those, we divide them into two categories: geographically based and thematic based. Geographic based means that it's referring to, respondents referring to a specific part of the city, such as south side, downtown, or the north part of town. 56% of them were geographic based. Majority of them were for downtown and Old Town. And then South End received a number of responses as well. And then the remaining.
I think his battery's dead, or he did something. We're just pushing buttons.
Sorry. All right. So the remaining 44%. Were thematic-based. Primary themes there were nowhere or everywhere, and then a few other in other areas such as new developments or specific areas.
When you say taller building, what is taller? How tall is tall?
Sid, you want to try that?
So, this is like your for purposes of the comp plan, really it's a matter of higher than what's permitted under the current zoning. So the colorful zoning map there on the other side of the smart board establishes generally a 35-foot height limit. So that's going to be somewhere around a 3-story building in most of the outlying districts, and 75-foot maximum height for buildings in the B1 district, which is all of the what most people consider the Old Town area. So there's been some, and that would render about 6 stories, maybe 7 if you had Winchester House, for instance, I think is 7 stories, 75-foot tall. So it would be a matter of should we allow 10-story buildings in downtown, and should we allow 4 to 5-story buildings where today it's only 3 stories.
So the third three-part question that we asked was, what do you like about living in the city of Winchester? We had 319 responses. Majority of them involved sound, character, quality of life, and community. That was about 162 responses. 156 involved the Old Town Walking Mall and the different businesses that the city has. And then other responses mainly included transportation and walkability, and then the historic culture and architecture. All right. And then our final question was, please tell us in one sentence what you'd like Winchester to be in 20 years. Some people did take some widen the definition of a sentence to a paragraph, so we do have a lot of good responses there. We have 342 responses. The majority of them vastly included the culture and character and community of the town. And then other responses were involved in demographics and businesses.